Chapter 7 of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7 The Examination. No sooner had Villefort left the salon than he assumed the grave air of a man who holds the balance of life and death in his hands. Now, in spite of the nobility of his countenance, the command of which, like a finished actor, he had carefully studied before the glass, it was by no means easy for him to assume an air of judicial severity. Except the recollection of the line of politics his father had adopted, and which might interfere, unless he acted with the greatest prudence, with his own career, Gérard de Villefort was as happy as a man could be. Already rich, he held a high official situation, though only 27. He was about to marry a young and charming woman, whom he loved, not passionately, but reasonably, as became a deputy attorney of the king, and besides her personal attractions, which were very great, Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran's family possessed considerable political influence, which they would, of course, exert in his favour. The dowry of his wife amounted to 50,000 crowns, and he had, besides, the prospect of seeing her fortune increased to 500,000 at her father's death. These considerations naturally gave Villefort a feeling of such complete felicity that his mind was fairly dazzled in its contemplation. At the door he met the commissary of police, who was waiting for him. The sight of this officer recalled Villefort from the third heaven to earth. He composed his face, as we have before described, and said, "I have read the letter, sir, and you have acted rightly in arresting this man. Now inform me what you have discovered concerning him and the conspiracy." "We know nothing as yet of the conspiracy, monsieur. All the papers found have been sealed up and placed on your desk. The prisoner himself is named Edmond Dantès, mate on board the three-master, the Pharaon, trading in cotton with Alexandre and Smyrna, and belonging to Morel and Son of Marseille. Before he entered the merchant service, had he ever served in the marines?" "Oh no, monsieur. He is very young." "How old?" 19 or 20 at the most." At this moment, and as Villefort had arrived at the corner of the Rue du Conseil, a man who seemed to have been waiting for him approached. It was Monsieur Morel. "Ah, Monsieur de Villefort," cried he, "I am delighted to see you. Some of your people have committed the strangest mistake. They have just arrested Edmond Dantès, mate of my vessel." "I know it, monsieur," replied Villefort, "and I am now going to examine him." "Oh," said Morel, carried away by his friendship, "you do not know him, and I do. He is the most estimable, the most trustworthy creature in the world, and I will venture to say there is not a better seaman in all the merchant service. Oh, Monsieur de Villefort, I beseech your indulgence for him." Villefort, as we have seen, belonged to the aristocratic party at Marseille, Morel to the plebeian. The first was a royalist, the other suspected of Bonapartism. Villefort looked disdainfully at Morel and replied, "You are aware, monsieur, that a man may be estimable and trustworthy in private life, and the best seaman in the merchant service, and yet be, politically speaking, a great criminal. Is it not true?" The magistrate laid emphasis on these words, as if he wished to apply them to the owner himself, while his eyes seemed to plunge into the heart of one who, interceding for another, had himself need of indulgence. Morel reddened, for his own conscience was not quite clear on politics. Besides, what Dantès had told him of his interview with the Grand Marshal, and what the Emperor had said to him, embarrassed him. He replied, however, "I entreat you, Monsieur de Villefort, be as you always are, kind and equitable, and give him back to us soon." This "give us" sounded revolutionary in the deputy's ears. "Aha!" murmured he. "Is Dantès then a member of some Carbonari society, that his protector thus employs the collective form?" He was, if I recollect, arrested in a tavern, in company with great many others. Then he added, Monsieur, you may rest assured I shall perform my duty impartially, and that if he be innocent, you shall not have appealed to me in vain. Should he, however, be guilty, in his present epoch, impunity would furnish a dangerous example, and I must do my duty. As he had now arrived at the door of his own house, which adjoined the Palais de Justice, he entered, after having coldly saluted the shipowner, who stood as if petrified on the spot where Villefort had left him. The antechamber was full of police agents and gendarmes, in the midst of whom, carefully watched, but calm and smiling, stood the prisoner. Villefort traversed the antechamber, cast a side glance at Dantès, and taking a packet which a gendarme offered him, disappeared, saying, "Bring in the prisoner." Rapid as had been Villefort's glance, it had served to give him an idea of the man he was about to interrogate. He had recognized intelligence in the high forehead, courage in the dark eye and bent brow, and frankness in the thick lips that showed a set of pearly teeth. Villefort's first impression was favorable, but he had been so often warned to mistrust first impulses that he applied the maxim to the impression, forgetting the difference between the two words. He stifled therefore the feelings of compassion that were rising, composed his features, and sat down, grim and sombre, at his desk. An instant after Dantès entered, he was pale but calm and collected, and saluting his judge with easy politeness, looked round for a seat, as if he had been in Monsieur Morel's salon. It was then that he encountered for the first time Villefort's look, that look peculiar to the magistrate, who, while seeming to read the thoughts of others, betrays nothing of his own. "Who and what are you?" demanded Villefort, turning over a pile of papers containing information relative to the prisoner that a police agent had given to him on his entry, and that already in an hour's time had swelled to voluminous proportions, thanks to the corrupt espionage of which the accused is always made the victim. "My name is Edmond Dantès," replied the young man calmly. "I am mate of the Pharaon, belonging to Messrs. Morel and Son." "Your age?" continued Villefort. 19, returned Dantès. "What were you doing at the moment you were arrested?" "I was at the festival of my marriage, monsieur," said the young man, his voice slightly tremulous. So great was the contrast between that happy moment and the painful ceremony he was now undergoing. So great was the contrast between the sombre aspect of Monsieur de Villefort and the radiant face of Mercédès. "You were at the festival of your marriage," said the deputy, shuddering in spite of himself. "Yes, monsieur. I am on the point of marrying a young girl I have been attached to for 3 years." Villefort, impassive as he was struck with this coincidence, and the tremulous voice of Dantès, surprised in the midst of his happiness, struck a sympathetic chord in his own bosom. He also was on the point of being married, and he was summoned from his own happiness to destroy that of another. "This philosophic reflection," thought he, "will make a great sensation at Monsieur de Saint-Méran's," and he arranged mentally, while Dantès awaited further questions, the antithesis by which orators often create a reputation for eloquence. When this speech was arranged, Villefort turned to Dantès. "Go on, sir," said he. "What would you have me say?" "Give all the information in your power." "Tell me on which point you desire information, and I will tell you all I know. Only," he added with a smile, "I warn you, I know very little." "Have you served under the usurper?" "I was about to be mustered into the Royal Marines when he fell." "It is reported your political opinions are extreme," said Villefort, who had never heard anything of the kind, but was not sorry to make this inquiry, as if it were an accusation. "My political opinions?" replied Dantès. "Alas, sir, I never had any opinions. I am hardly 19. I know nothing. I have no part to play. If I obtain the situation I desire, I shall owe it to Monsieur Morel. Thus all my opinions, I will not say it public, but private, are confined to these three sentiments. I love my father, I respect Monsieur Morel, and I adore Mercédès. This, sir, is all I can tell you, and you see how uninteresting it is." As Dantès spoke, Villefort gazed at his ingenuous and open countenance, and recollected the words of Renée, who, without knowing who the culprit was, had besought his indulgence for him. With the deputy's knowledge of crime and criminals, every word the young man uttered convinced him more and more of his innocence. This lad, for he was scarcely a man, simple, natural, eloquent with that eloquence of the heart never found when sought for, full of affection for everybody because he was happy and because happiness renders even the wicked good, extended his affection even to his judge, spite of Villefort's severe look and stern accent. Dantès seemed full of kindness. "Pardieu," said Villefort, "he is a noble fellow. I hope I shall gain Renée's favour easily by obeying the first command she ever imposed on me. I shall have at least a pressure of the hand in public, and a sweet kiss in private." Full of this idea, Villefort's face became so joyous that when he turned to Dantès, the latter, who had watched the change on his physiognomy, was smiling also. "Sir," said Villefort, "have you any enemies, at least, that you know?" "I have enemies?" replied Dantès. "My position is not sufficiently elevated for that. As for my disposition, that is, perhaps, somewhat too hasty. But I have striven to repress it. I have had 10 or 12 sailors under me, and if you question them, they will tell you that they love and respect me, not as a father, for I am too young, but as an elder brother." "But you may have excited jealousy. You are about to become captain at 19, an elevated post. You are about to marry a pretty girl who loves you, and these two pieces of good fortune may have excited the envy of someone." "You are right. You know men better than I do, and what you say may possibly be the case, I confess. But if such persons are among my acquaintances, I prefer not to know it, because then I should be forced to hate them." "You are wrong. You should always strive to see clearly around you. You seem a worthy young man. I will depart from the strict line of my duty to aid you in discovering the author of this accusation. Here is the paper. Do you know the writing?" As he spoke, Villefort drew the letter from his pocket, and presented it to Dantès. Dantès read it. A cloud passed over his brow as he said, "No, monsieur, I do not know the writing, and yet it is tolerably plain. Whoever did it writes well. I am very fortunate," added he, looking gratefully at Villefort, "to be examined by such a man as you, for this envious person is a real enemy." And by the rapid glance that the young man's eyes shot forth, Villefort saw how much energy lay hid beneath his mildness. "Now," said the deputy, "answer me frankly, not as a prisoner to a judge, but as one man to another who takes an interest in him. What truth is there in the accusation contained in this anonymous letter?" And Villefort threw disdainfully on his desk the letter Dantès had just given back to him. "None at all. I will tell you the real facts. I swear by my honor as a sailor, by my love for Mercédès, by the life of my father." "Speak, monsieur," said Villefort. Then internally, "If Renée could see me, I hope she would be satisfied, and would no longer call me a decapitator." "Well, when we quitted Naples, Captain Leclerc was attacked with a brain fever. As we had no doctor on board, and he was so anxious to arrive at Elba that he would not touch at any other port, his disorder rose to such a height that at the end of the 3rd day, feeling he was dying, he called me to him. "My dear Dantès," said he, "swear to perform what I am going to tell you." for it is a matter of the deepest importance." "I swear, Captain," replied I. "Well, as after my death, the command devolves on you as mate, assume the command and bear up for the island of Elba. Disembark at Porto Ferraio, ask for the Grand Marshal. Give him this letter. Perhaps they will give you another letter and charge you with a commission. You will accomplish what I was to have done, and derive all the honor and profit from it." "I will do it, Captain, but perhaps I shall not be admitted to the Grand Marshal's presence as easily as you expect." "Here is a ring that will obtain audience of him, and remove every difficulty," said the captain. At these words he gave me a ring. It was time. 2 hours after he was delirious, the next day, he died. "And what did you do then?" "What I ought to have done, and what everyone would have done in my place. Everywhere the last requests of a dying man are sacred, but with a sailor the last requests of his superior are commands. I sailed for the island of Elba, where I arrived the next day. I ordered everybody to remain on board and went on shore alone. As I had expected, I found some difficulty in obtaining access to the Grand Marshal, but I sent the ring and I had received from the captain to him, and was instantly admitted. He questioned me concerning Captain Leclerc's death, and, as the latter had told me, gave me a letter to carry on to a person in Paris. I undertook it because it was what my captain had bade me do. I landed here, regulated the affairs of the vessel, and hastened to visit my affianced bride, whom I found more lovely than ever. Thanks to Monsieur Morel, all the forms were got over. In a word, I was told, as I told you at my marriage feast, and I should have been married in an hour, and tomorrow I intended to start for Paris, had I not been arrested on this charge, which you as well as I now see to be unjust." "Ah," said Villefort, "this seems to be the truth. If you have been culpable, it was imprudence, and this imprudence was in obedience to the orders of your captain. Give up this letter you have brought from Elba, and pass your word you will appear should be required, and go and rejoin your friends." "I am free then, sir?" cried Dante joyfully. "Yes, but first give me this letter." "You have it already, for it was taken from me, with some others which I see in that packet." "Stop a moment," said the deputy, as Dante took his hat and gloves. "To whom is it addressed?" "To Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coqueron, Paris." Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room, Villefort could not have been more stupefied. He sank into his seat and hastily, turning over the packet, drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced with an expression of terror. "Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coqueron, numéro 13, murmured he, growing still paler. "Yes," said Dante. "Do you know him?" "No," replied Villefort. "A faithful servant of the king does not know conspirators." "It is a conspiracy, then?" asked Dante, who, after believing himself free, now began to feel a tenfold alarm. "I have, however, already told you, sir, I was entirely ignorant of the contents of the letter." "Yes, but you know the name of the person to whom it was addressed," said Villefort. "I was forced to read the address, to know to whom to give it." "Have you shown this letter to anyone?" asked Villefort, becoming still more pale. "To no one, on my honor." "Everybody is ignorant that you are the bearer of a letter from the island of Elba, and addressed to Monsieur Noirtier." "Everybody except the person who gave it to me." "And that was too much, far too much," murmured Villefort. Villefort's brow darkened more and more. His white lips and clenched teeth filled Dante with apprehension. After reading the letter, Villefort covered his face with his hands. "Oh," said Dante timidly. "What is the matter?" Villefort made no answer, but raised his head at the expiration of a few seconds, and again perused the letter. "And you say that you are ignorant of the contents of this letter?" "I give you my word of honor, sir," said Dante. "But what is the matter? You are ill. Shall I ring for assistance? Shall I call?" "No," said Villefort, rising hastily. "Stay where you are. It is for me to give orders here, not you." "Monsieur," replied Dante proudly, "it was only to summon assistance for you." "I want none. It was a temporary indisposition. Attend to yourself. Answer me." Dante waited, expecting a question, but in vain. Villefort fell back on his chair, passed his hand over his brow, moist with perspiration, and for the third time read the letter. "Oh, if he knows the contents of this," murmured he, "and that Noirtier is the father of Villefort, I am lost." And he fixed his eyes upon Edmond, as if he would have penetrated his thoughts. "Oh, it is impossible to doubt it!" cried he suddenly. "In heaven's name," cried the unhappy young man, "if you doubt me, question me. I will answer you." Villefort made a violent effort, and in a tone he strove to render firm. "Sir," said he, "I am no longer able, as I had hoped, to restore you immediately to liberty. Before doing so, I must consult the trial justice. What my own feeling is you already know." "Oh, monsieur," cried Dante, "you have been rather a friend than a judge." "Well, I must detain you some time longer, but I will strive to make it as short as possible. The principal charge against you is this letter, and you see—" Villefort approached the fire, cast it in, and waited until it was entirely consumed. "You see, I destroy it." "Oh," exclaimed Dante, "you are goodness itself." "Listen," continued Villefort. "You can now have confidence in me after what I have done." "Oh, command, and I will obey." "Listen. This is not a command, but advice I give you." "Speak, and I will follow your advice." "I shall detain you until this evening in the Palais de Justice. Should anyone else interrogate you, say to him what you have said to me, but do not breathe a word of this letter." "I promise." It was Villefort who seemed to entreat, and the prisoner who reassured him. "You see," continued he, glancing toward the grate, where fragments of burnt paper fluttered in the flames, "the letter is destroyed. You and I alone know of its existence. Should you therefore be questioned, deny all knowledge of it. Deny it boldly, and you are saved." "Be satisfied, I will deny it." "It was the only letter you had?" "It was." "Swear it." "I swear it." Villefort rang. A police agent entered. Villefort whispered some words in his ear, to which the officer replied by a motion of his head. "Follow him," said Villefort to Dante. Dante saluted Villefort and retired. Hardly had the door closed when Villefort threw himself, half fainting, into a chair. "Alas, alas!" murmured he. "If the procureur himself had been at Marseilles, I should have been ruined. This accursed letter would have destroyed all my hopes. Oh, my father, must you, past career, always interfere with my successes?" Suddenly a light passed over his face. A smile played round his set mouth, and his haggard eyes were fixed in thought. "This will do," said he. "And from this letter, which might have ruined me, I will make my fortune. Now, to the work I have in hand." And after having assured himself that the prisoner was gone, the deputy procureur hastened to the house of his betrothed. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8. The Château d'If. The commissary of police, as he traversed the antechamber, made a sign to two gendarmes, who placed themselves one on Dante's right and the other on his left. A door that communicated with the Palais de Justice was opened, and they went through a long range of gloomy corridors, whose appearance might have made even the boldest shudder. The Palais de Justice communicated with the prison, a sombre edifice that from its grated windows looks on the clock tower of the Accoul. After numberless windings, Dante saw a door with an iron wicket. The commissary took up an iron mallet and knocked thrice. Every blow seemed to Dante as if struck on his heart. The door opened, the two gendarmes gently pushed him forward, and the door closed with a loud sound behind him. The air he inhaled was no longer pure, but thick and mephitic. He was in prison. He was conducted to a tolerably neat chamber, but grated and barred, and its appearance, therefore, did not greatly alarm him. Besides, the words of Villefort, who seemed to interest himself so much, resounded still in his ears like a promise of freedom. It was 4 o'clock when Dante was placed in this chamber. It was, as we have said, the 1st of March, and the prisoner was soon buried in darkness. The obscurity augmented the acuteness of his hearing. At the slightest sound he rose and hastened to the door, convinced they were about to liberate him. But the sound died away, and Dante sank again into his seat. At last, about 10 o'clock, and just as Dante began to despair, steps were heard in the corridor. A key turned in the lock. The bolts creaked, the massy oaken door flew open, and a flood of light from 2 torches pervaded the apartment. By the torchlight, Dante saw the glittering sabres and carbines of 4 gendarmes. He had advanced at first, but stopped at the sight of this display of force. "Are you come here to fetch me?" asked he. "Yes," replied a gendarme. "By the orders of the deputy procureur?" "I believe so." The conviction that they came from M. de Villefort relieved all Dante's apprehensions. He advanced calmly and placed himself in the centre of the escort. A carriage waited at the door. The coachman was on the box, and a police officer sat beside him. "Is this carriage for me?" said Dante. "It is for you," replied a gendarme. Dante was about to speak, but feeling himself urged forward, and having neither the power nor the intention to resist, he mounted the steps, and was in an instant seated inside between 2 gendarmes. The 2 others took their places opposite, and the carriage rolled heavily over the stones. The prisoner glanced at the windows. They were grated. He had changed his prison for another that was conveying him he knew not whither. Through the grating, however, Dante saw they were passing through the Rue Caisserie and by the Rue Saint-Laurent and the Rue Taramie to the port. Soon he saw the lights of La Consigne. The carriage stopped. The officer descended, approached the guardhouse. A dozen soldiers came out and formed themselves in order. Dante saw the reflection of their muskets by the light of the lamps on the quay. "Can all this force be summoned on my account?" thought he. The officer opened the door, which was locked, and without speaking a word, answered Dante's question, for he saw between the ranks of the soldiers a passage formed from the carriage to the port. The 2 gendarmes who were opposite to him descended first. Then he was ordered to alight, and the gendarme on each side of him followed his example. They advanced towards a boat which a custom-house officer held by a chain near the quay. The soldiers looked at Dante with an air of stupid curiosity. In an instant he was placed in the stern sheets of the boat, between the gendarmes, while the officer stationed himself at the bow. A shove sent the boat adrift, and 4 sturdy oarsmen impelled it rapidly towards the Pilon. At a shout from the boat, the chain that closes the mouth of the port was lowered, and in a second they were, as Dante knew, in the Frioul and outside the inner harbour. The prisoner's first feeling was of joy at again breathing the pure air, for air is freedom. But he soon sighed, for he passed before La Réserve, where he had that morning been so happy, and now, through the open windows, came the laughter and revelry of a ball. Dante folded his hands, raised his eyes to heaven, and prayed fervently. The boat continued her voyage. They had passed the Tête de Morte, were now off the Anse du Pharaon, and about to double the battery. This manoeuvre was incomprehensible to Dante. "Whither are you taking me?" asked he. "You will soon know." "But still—" "We are forbidden to give you an explanation." Dante, trained in discipline, knew that nothing would be more absurd than to question subordinates, who were forbidden to reply, and so he remained silent. The most vague and wild thoughts passed through his mind. The boat they were in could not make a long voyage. There was no vessel at anchor outside the harbour. He thought perhaps they were going to leave him on some distant point. He was not bound, nor had they made any attempt to handcuff him. This seemed a good augury. Besides, had not the deputy, who had been so kind to him, told him that provided he did not pronounce the dreaded name of Noirtier, he had nothing to apprehend? Had not Villefort, in his presence, destroyed the fatal letter, the only proof against him? He waited silently, striving to pierce through the darkness. They had left the Île Ratonneau, where the lighthouse stood on the right, and were now opposite the Point des Catalans. It seemed to the prisoner that he could distinguish a feminine form on the beach, for it was there Mercédès dwelt. How was it that a presentiment did not warn Mercédès that her lover was within 300 yards of her? One light alone was visible, and Dante saw that it came from Mercédès' chamber. Mercédès was the only one awake in the whole settlement. A loud cry could be heard by her, but pride restrained him, and he did not utter it. What would his guards think if they heard him shout like a madman? He remained silent, his eyes fixed upon the light. The boat went on, but the prisoner thought only of Mercédès. An intervening elevation of land hid the light. Dante turned, and perceived that they had got out to sea. While he had been absorbed in thought, they had shipped their oars and hoisted sail. The boat was now moving with the wind. In spite of his repugnance to address the guards, Dante turned to the nearest gendarme, and taking his hand, "Comrade," said he, "I adjure you, as a Christian and a soldier, to tell me where we are going. I am Captain Dante, a loyal Frenchman, thought accused of treason. Tell me where you are conducting me, and I promise, on my honour, I will submit to my fate." The gendarme looked irresolutely at his companion, who returned for answer a sign that said, "I see no great harm in telling him now." And the gendarme replied, "You are a native of Marseille, and a sailor, and yet you do not know where you are going?" "On my honour, I have no idea." "Have you no idea whatever?" "None at all." "That is impossible." "I swear to you, it is true. Tell me, I entreat." "But my orders—" "Your orders do not forbid your telling me what I must know in 10 minutes, in half an hour, or an hour. You see, I cannot escape, even if I intended." "Unless you are blind, or have never been outside the harbour, you must know." "I do not." "Look round you, then." Dante rose and looked forward, when he saw rise within 100 yards of him the black and frowning rock on which stands the Château d'If. This gloomy fortress, which has for more than 300 years furnished food for so many wild legends, seemed to Dante like a scaffold to a malefactor. "The Château d'If?" cried he. "What are we going there for?" The gendarme smiled. "I'm not going there to be imprisoned," said Dante. "It is only used for political prisoners. I have committed no crime. Are there any magistrates or judges at the Château d'If?" "There are only," said the gendarme, "a governor, a garrison, turnkeys, and good thick walls. Come, come, do not look so astonished. or you will make me think you are laughing at me in return for my good nature." Dante pressed the gendarme's hand as though he would crush it. "You think, then," said he, "that I am taken to the Château d'If to be imprisoned there?" "It is probable, but there is no occasion to squeeze so hard." "Without any inquiry? Without any formality?" "All the formalities have been gone through. The inquiry is already made." "And so in spite of Monsieur de Villefort's promises?" "I do not know what Monsieur de Villefort promised you," said the gendarme, "but I know we are taking you to the Château d'If. But what are you doing? Help, comrade, help!" By a rapid movement, which the gendarme's practised eye had perceived, Dante sprang forward to precipitate himself into the sea, but 4 vigorous arms seized him as his feet quitted the bottom of the boat. He fell back, cursing with rage. "Good," said the gendarme, placing his knee on his chest. "Believe soft-spoken gentlemen again. Harkee, my friend, I have disobeyed my first order, but I will not disobey the second, and if you move, I will blow your brains out." And he levelled his carbine at Dante, who felt the muzzle against his temple. For a moment, the idea of struggling crossed his mind, and of so ending the unexpected evil that had overtaken him. But he bethought of Monsieur de Villefort's promise, and, besides, death in a boat from the hand of a gendarme seemed too terrible. He remained motionless, but gnashing his teeth and wringing his hands with fury. At this moment the boat came to a landing with a violent shock. One of the sailors leapt on shore. A cord creaked as it ran through a pulley, and Dante guessed they were at the end of the voyage, and that they were mooring the boat. His guards, taking him by the arms and coat collar, forced him to rise, and dragged him towards the steps that led to the gate of the fortress, while the police officer, carrying a musket with fixed bayonet, followed behind. Dante made no resistance. He was like a man in a dream. He saw soldiers drawn up on the embankment. He knew vaguely that he was ascending a flight of steps. He was conscious that he passed through a door, and that the door closed behind him, but all this indistinctly as through a mist. He did not even see the ocean, that terrible barrier against freedom, which the prisoners look upon with utter despair. They halted for a minute, during which he strove to collect his thoughts. He looked around. He was in a court surrounded by high walls. He heard the measured tread of sentinels, and as they passed before the light, he saw the barrels of their muskets shine. They waited upwards of 10 minutes, certain Dante could not escape. The gendarme released him. They seemed awaiting orders. The orders came. "Where is the prisoner?" said a voice. "Here," replied the gendarme. "Let him follow me. I will take him to his cell." "Go," said the gendarme, thrusting Dante forward. The prisoner followed his guide, who led him into a room almost underground, whose bare and reeking walls seemed as though impregnated with tears. A lamp, placed on a stool, illumined the apartment faintly, and showed Dante the features of his conductor, an under-jailer, ill-clothed and of sullen appearance. "Here is your chamber for tonight," said he. "It is late, and the governor is asleep. Tomorrow, perhaps, he may change you. In the meantime there is bread, water, and fresh straw, and that is all a prisoner can wish for. Good night." And before Dante could open his mouth, before he had noticed where the jailer placed his bread or the water, before he had glanced towards the corner where the straw was, the jailer disappeared, taking with him the lamp and closing the door, leaving stamped upon the prisoner's mind the dim reflection of the dripping walls of his dungeon. Dante was alone in darkness and in silence, cold as the shadows that he felt breathe on his burning forehead. With the first dawn of day, the jailer returned, with orders to leave Dante where he was. He found the prisoner in the same position, as if fixed there, his eyes swollen with weeping. He had passed the night standing and without sleep. The jailer advanced. Dante appeared not to perceive him. He touched him on the shoulder. Edmond started. "Have you not slept?" said the jailer. "I do not know," replied Dante. The jailer stared. "Are you hungry?" continued he. "I do not know." "Do you wish for anything?" "I wish to see the governor." The jailer shrugged his shoulders and left the chamber. Dante followed him with his eyes and stretched forth his hands towards the open door, but the door closed. All his emotion then burst forth. He cast himself on the ground, weeping bitterly and asking himself what crime he had committed that he was thus punished. The day passed thus. He scarcely tasted food, but walked around and round the cell like a wild beast in its cage. One thought in particular tormented him, namely that during his journey hither he had sat so still, whereas he might, a dozen times, have plunged into the sea, and, thanks to his powers of swimming, for which he was famous, have gained the shore, concealed himself until the arrival of a Genoese or Spanish vessel, escaped to Spain or Italy, where Mercédès and his father could have joined him. He had no fears as to how he should live. Good seamen are welcome everywhere. He spoke Italian like a Tuscan, and Spanish like a Castilian. He would have been free and happy with Mercédès and his father, whereas he was now confined in the Château d'If, that impregnable fortress, ignorant of the future destiny of his father and Mercédès, and all this because he had trusted to Villefort's promise. The thought was maddening, and Dante threw himself furiously down on his straw. The next morning, at the same hour, the jailer came again. "Well," said the jailer, "are you more reasonable today?" Dante made no reply. "Come, cheer up. Is there anything that I can do for you?" "I wish to see the governor." "I have already told you it was impossible." "Why so?" "Because it is against prison rules, and prisoners must not even ask for it." "What is allowed, then?" "Better fare, if you pay for it, books, and leave to walk about." "I do not want books. I am satisfied with my food, and do not care to walk about. But I wish to see the governor." "If you worry me by repeating the same thing, I will not bring you any more to eat." "Well then," said Edmond, "if you do not, I shall die of hunger, that is all." The jailer saw by his tone he would be happy to die, and as every prisoner is worth 10 sous a day to his jailer, he replied in a more subdued tone, "What you ask is impossible, but if you are very well behaved, you will be allowed to walk about, and some day you will meet the governor, and if he chooses to reply, that is his affair." "But," asked Dante, "how long shall I have to wait?" "Ah, a month, 6 months, a year." "It is too long a time. I wish to see him at once." "Ah," said the jailer, "do not always brood over what is impossible, or you will be mad in a fortnight." "You think so?" "Yes. We have an instance here. It was by always offering 1,000,000 of francs to the governor for his liberty that an abbé became mad, who was in this chamber before you." "How long has he left it?" 2 years. "Was he liberated then?" "No. He was put in a dungeon." "Listen," said Dante. "I am not an abbé. I am not mad. Perhaps I shall be, but at present, unfortunately, I am not. I'll make you another offer." "What is that?" "I do not offer you 1,000,000 because I have it not. But I will give you 100 crowns if, the first time you go to Marseille, you will seek out a young girl named Mercédès at the Catalan, and give her 2 lines from me." "If I took them and were detected, I should lose my place, which is worth 2,000 francs a year, so that I should be a great fool to run such a risk for 300. "Well," said Dante, "mark this. If you refuse at least to tell Mercédès I am here, I will some day hide myself behind the door, and when you enter, I will dash out your brains with this stool." "Threats," cried the jailer, retreating and putting himself on the defensive. "You are certainly going mad. The abbé began like you, and in 3 days you will be like him, mad enough to tie up. But fortunately there are dungeons here." Dante whirled the stool round his head. All right, said the jailer. "All right, since you will have it so, I will send word to the governor." "Very well," returned Dante, dropping the stool and sitting on it as if he were in reality mad. The jailer went out and returned in an instant with a corporal and 4 soldiers. "By the governor's orders," said he, "conduct the prisoner to the tier beneath." "To the dungeon, then?" said the corporal. "Yes, we must put the madman with the madmen." The soldiers seized Dante, who followed passively. He descended 15 steps, and the door of a dungeon was opened, and he was thrust in. The door closed, and Dante advanced with outstretched hands until he touched the wall. He then sat down in the corner until his eyes became accustomed to the darkness. The jailer was right. Dante wanted but little of being utterly mad. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. The Evening of the Betrothal. Villefort had, as we have said, hastened back to Madame de Saint-Méran's in the Place du Grand Cour, and on entering the house found that the guests whom he had left at table were taking coffee in the salon. René was, with all the rest of the company, anxiously awaiting him, and his entrance was followed by a general exclamation. "Well, decapitator, guardian of the state, royalist, Brutus, what is the matter?" said one. "Speak out." "Are we threatened with a fresh reign of terror?" asked another. "Has the Corsican Ogre broken loose?" cried a third. "Marquise," said Villefort, approaching his future mother-in-law, "I request your pardon for thus leaving you. Will the Marquise honour me by a few moments' private conversation?" "Ah, it is a really serious matter, then?" asked the Marquis, remarking the cloud on Villefort's brow. "So serious that I must take leave of you for a few days. So," added he, turning to René, "judge for yourself, if it be not important." "You are not going to leave us?" cried René, unable to hide her emotion at this unexpected announcement. "Alas," returned Villefort, "I must." "Where, then, are you going?" asked the Marquise. "That, madam, is an official secret. But if you have any commissions for Paris, a friend of mine is going there tonight, and will with pleasure undertake them." The guests looked at each other. "You wish to speak to me alone?" said the Marquis. "Yes, let us go to the library, please." The Marquis took his arm, and they left the salon. "Well," asked he, as soon as they were by themselves, "tell me what it is." "An affair of the greatest importance that demands my immediate presence in Paris. Now, excuse the indiscretion, Marquis, but have you any landed property?" "All my fortune is in the funds, 700,000 or 800,000 francs." "Then sell out, Marquis, or you will lose it all." "How can I sell out here?" "You have a broker, have you not?" "Yes." "Then give me a letter to him, and tell him to sell out without an instant's delay. Perhaps even now I shall arrive too late." "The deuce you say," replied the Marquis. "Let us lose no time, then." And sitting down he wrote a letter to his broker, ordering him to sell out at the market price. "Now then," said Villefort, placing the letter in his pocket-book, "I must have another." "To whom?" "To the king." "To the king?" "Yes." "I dare not write to his Majesty." "I do not ask you to write to his Majesty, but ask Monsieur de Salvieux to do so. I want a letter that will enable me to reach the king's presence without all the formalities of demanding an audience. That would occasion a loss of precious time. But address yourself to the keeper of the seals. He has the right of entry at the Tuileries, and can procure your audience at any hour of the day or night. Doubtless, but there is no occasion to divide the honours of my discovery with him. The keeper would leave me in the background, and take all the glory to himself. I tell you, Marquis, my fortune is made if I only reach the Tuileries the first, for the king will not forget the service I do him. In that case, go and get ready. I will call Salvieux, and make him write the letter. Be as quick as possible. I must be on the road in 1/4 of an hour. Tell your coachman to stop at the door. You will present my excuses to the Marquise and Mademoiselle Renée, whom I leave on such a day with great regret. You will find them both here, and can make your farewells in person. 1,000 thanks. And now for the letter. The Marquis rang. A servant entered. Say to the Comte de Salvieux that I would like to see him. Now then, go, said the Marquis. I shall be gone only a few moments. Villefort hastily quitted the apartment, but reflecting that the sight of the deputy procureur running through the streets would be enough to throw the whole city into confusion, he resumed his ordinary pace. At his door he perceived a figure in the shadow that seemed to wait for him. It was Mercédès, who, hearing no news of her lover, had come unobserved to inquire after him. As Villefort drew near, she advanced and stood before him. Dantès had spoken of Mercédès, and Villefort instantly recognized her. Her beauty and high bearing surprised him, and when she inquired what had become of her lover, it seemed to him that she was the judge and he the accused. "The young man you speak of," said Villefort abruptly, "is a great criminal, and I can do nothing for him, mademoiselle." Mercédès burst into tears, and as Villefort strove to pass her, again addressed him. "But at least tell me where he is, that I may know whether he is alive or dead," said she. "I do not know. He is no longer in my hands," replied Villefort. And, desirous of putting an end to the interview, he pushed by her and closed the door, as if to exclude the pain he felt. But remorse is not thus banished. Like Virgil's wounded hero, he carried the arrow in his wound, and arrived at the salon. Villefort uttered a sigh that was almost a sob, and sank into a chair. Then the first pangs of an unending torture seized upon his heart. The man he sacrificed to his ambition, that innocent victim immolated on the altar of his father's faults, appeared to him pale and threatening, leading his affianced bride by the hand, and bringing with him remorse, not such as the ancients figured, furious and terrible, but that slow and consuming agony whose pangs are intensified from hour to hour, up to the very moment of death. Then he had a moment's hesitation. He had frequently called for capital punishment on criminals, and owing to his irresistible eloquence they had been condemned, and yet the slightest shadow of remorse had never clouded Villefort's brow, because they were guilty. At least he believed so. But here was an innocent man whose happiness he had destroyed. In this case he was not the judge, but the executioner. As he thus reflected, he felt the sensation we have described, and which had hitherto been unknown to him, arise in his bosom, and fill him with vague apprehensions. It is thus that a wounded man trembles instinctively at the approach of the finger to his wound until it be healed. But Villefort's was one of those that never close, or if they do, only close to reopen more agonizing than ever. If at this moment the sweet voice of Renée had sounded in his ears, pleading for mercy, or the fair Mercédès had entered and said, "In the name of God, I conjure you to restore my affianced husband," his cold and trembling hands would have signed his release. But no voice broke the stillness of the chamber, and the door was opened only by Villefort's valet, who came to tell him that the travelling carriage was in readiness. Villefort arose, or rather sprang, from his chair, hastily opened one of the drawers of his desk, emptied all the gold it contained into his pocket, stood motionless an instant, his hand pressed to his head, muttered a few inarticulate sounds, and then, perceiving that his servant had placed his cloak on his shoulders, he sprang into the carriage, ordering the postilions to drive to Monsieur de Saint-Méran's. The hapless Dante was doomed. As the Marquis had promised, Villefort found the Marquise and Renée in waiting. He started when he saw Renée, for he fancied she was again about to plead for Dante. Alas, her emotions were wholly personal. She was thinking only of Villefort's departure. She loved Villefort, and he left her at the moment he was about to become her husband. Villefort knew not when he should return, and Renée, far from pleading for Dante, hated the man whose crime separated her from her lover. Meanwhile, what of Mercédès? She had met Fernand at the corner of the Rue de la Loge. She had returned to the Catalans, and had despairingly cast herself on her couch. Fernand, kneeling by her side, took her hand and covered it with kisses that Mercédès did not even feel. She passed the night thus. The lamp went out for want of oil, but she paid no heed to the darkness, and dawn came, but she knew not that it was day. Grief had made her blind to all but one object. That was Edmond. "Ah, you are there," she said at length, turning towards Fernand. "I have not quitted you since yesterday," returned Fernand sorrowfully. Monsieur Morel had not readily given up the fight. He learned that Dante had been taken to prison, and he had gone to all his friends and the influential persons of the city. But the report was already in circulation that Dante was arrested as a Bonapartist agent, and as the most sanguine looked upon any attempt of Napoleon to remount the throne as impossible, he met nothing but refusal, and had returned home in despair, declaring that the matter was serious, and that nothing more could be done. Caderousse was equally restless and uneasy, but instead of seeking, like Monsieur Morel, to aid Dante, he had shut himself up with 2 bottles of black-currant brandy in the hope of drowning reflection. But he did not succeed, and became too intoxicated to fetch any more drink, and yet not so intoxicated as to forget what had happened. With his elbows on the table, he sat between the 2 empty bottles, while spectres danced in the light of the unsnuffed candle, spectres such as Hoffmann strews over his punch-drenched pages like black, fantastic dust. Danglars alone was content and joyous. He had got rid of an enemy, and made his own situation on the Pharaon secure. Danglars was one of those men born with a pen behind the ear and an inkstand in place of a heart. Everything with him was multiplication or subtraction. The life of a man was to him of far less value than a numeral, especially when by taking it away he could increase the sum total of his own desires. He went to bed at his usual hour and slept in peace. Villefort, after having received Monsieur de Salvieux's letter, embraced Renée, kissed the Marquis's hand, and shaken that of the Marquis, started for Paris, along the Aix road. Old Dante was dying with anxiety to know what had become of Edmond. But we know very well what had become of Edmond. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. The King's Closet at the Tuileries. We will leave Villefort on the road to Paris, travelling, thanks to trebled fees, with all speed and passing through 2 or 3 apartments, enter at the Tuileries the little room with the arched window, so well known as having been the favourite closet of Napoleon and Louis XVIII, and now of Louis Philippe. There, seated before a walnut table, he had brought with him from Hartwell, and to which, from one of those fancies not uncommon to great people, he was particularly attached, the king, Louis XVIII, was carelessly listening to a man of 50 or 52 years of age, with grey hair, aristocratic bearing, and exceedingly gentlemanly attire, and meanwhile making a marginal note, in a volume of Griffiths's rather inaccurate but much sought-after edition of Horace, a work which was much indebted to the sagacious observations of the philosophical monarch. "You say, sir," said the king, "that I am exceedingly disquieted, sire." "Really, have you had a vision of the 7 fat kine and the 7 lean kine?" "No, sire, for that would only betoken for us 7 years of plenty and 7 years of scarcity. And when a king as full of foresight as your majesty, scarcity is not a thing to be feared. Then of what other scourge are you afraid, my dear Blacka?" "Sire, I have every reason to believe that a storm is brewing in the south." "Well, my dear Duke," replied Louis XVIII, "I think you are wrongly informed, and know positively that, on the contrary, it is very fine weather in that direction." Man of ability as he was, Louis XVIII liked a pleasant jest. "Sire," continued Monsieur de Blacas, "if it only be to reassure a faithful servant, will your majesty send into Languedoc, Provence, and Dauphine trusty men who will bring you back a faithful report as to the feeling in these 3 provinces?" "Caninus sordis," replied the king, continuing the annotations in his Horace. "Sire," replied the courtier, laughing in order that he might seem to comprehend the quotation, "your majesty may be perfectly right in relying on the good feeling of France, but I fear I am not altogether wrong in dreading some desperate attempt." "By whom?" "By Bonaparte, or at least by his adherents." "My dear Blacas," said the king, "you, with your alarms, prevent me from working." "And you, sire, prevent me from sleeping, with your security." "Wait, my dear sir, wait a moment, for I have such a delightful note on the pastor quum traheret. Wait, and I will listen to you afterwards." There was a brief pause, during which Louis XVIII wrote, in a hand as small as possible, another note on the margin of his Horace, and then, looking at the Duke with the air of a man who thinks he has an idea of his own, while he is only commenting upon the idea of another, said, "Go on, my dear Duke, go on, I listen." "Sire," said Blacas, who had for a moment the hope of sacrificing Villefort to his own profit, "I am compelled to tell you that these are not mere rumours destitute of foundation, which thus disquiet me, but a serious-minded man, deserving all my confidence, and charged by me to watch over the south," the Duke hesitated as he pronounced these words, "has arrived by post to tell me that a great peril threatens the king, and so I hasten to you, sire." "Mala ducis avi domum," continued Louis XVIII, still annotating. "Does your majesty wish me to drop the subject?" "By no means, my dear Duke, but just stretch out your hand." "Which?" "Whichever you please, there to the left." "Here, sire." "I tell you the left, and you are looking to the right. I mean on my left. Yes, there. You will find yesterday's report of the Minister of Police, but here is Mr. d'Andre himself." And Monsieur d'Andre, announced by the chamberlain-in-waiting, entered. "Come in," said Louis XVIII, with repressed smile. "Come in, Baron, and tell the Duke all you know, the latest news of Monsieur de Bonaparte. Do not conceal anything, however serious. Let us see, the island of Elba is a volcano, and we may expect to have issuing thence flaming and bristling warbella, horrida bella." Monsieur d'Andre leaned very respectfully on the back of a chair with his two hands and said, "Has your Majesty perused yesterday's report?" "Yes, yes, but tell the Duke himself, who cannot find anything, what the report contains. Give him the particulars of what the usurper is doing in his islet." "Monsieur," said the Baron to the Duke, "all the servants of his Majesty must approve of the latest intelligence which we have from the island of Elba. Bonaparte." Monsieur d'Andre looked at Louis XVIII, who, employed in writing a note, did not even raise his head. "Bonaparte," continued the Baron, "is mortally wearied and passes all days in watching his miners at work at Porto Longone." "And scratches himself for amusement," added the king. "Scratches himself?" inquired the Duke. "What does your Majesty mean?" "Yes, indeed, my dear Duke. Did you forget that this great man, this hero, this demigod, is attacked with a malady of the skin, which worries him to death, a prurigo? And moreover, my dear Duke," continued the Minister of Police, "we are almost assured that in a very short time the usurper will be insane." "Insane?" "Raving mad. His head becomes weaker. Sometimes he weeps bitterly, sometimes laughs boisterously. At other times he passes hours on the seashore, flinging stones in the water, and when the flint makes duck and drake 5 or 6 times, he appears as delighted as if he had gained another Marengo or Austerlitz. Now, you must agree that these are indubitable symptoms of insanity." "Or of wisdom, my dear Baron, or of wisdom," said Louis XVIII, laughing. "The greatest captains of antiquity amuse themselves by casting pebbles into the ocean. See Plutarch's Life of Scipio Africanus." Monsieur de Blacas pondered deeply between the confident monarch and the truthful minister. Villefort, who did not choose to reveal the whole secret, lest another should reap all the benefit of the disclosure, had yet communicated enough to cause him the greatest uneasiness. "Well, well, d'André," said Louis XVIII, "Blacas is not yet convinced. Let us proceed, therefore, to the usurper's conversion." The Minister of Police bowed. "The usurper's conversion?" murmured the Duke, looking at the king, and d'Andre, who spoke alternatively like Virgil shepherds. "The usurper converted?" "Decidedly, my dear Duke." "In what way converted?" "To good principles. Tell him all about it, Baron." "Why, this is the way of it," said the minister, with the gravest air in the world. "Napoleon lately had a review, and as 2 or 3 of his old veterans expressed a desire to return to France, he gave them their dismissal and exhorted them to serve the good king. These were his own words. Of that I am certain." "Well, Blacas, what think you of this?" inquired the king triumphantly, and pausing for a moment from the voluminous scholiast before him. "I say, sire, that the Minister of Police is greatly deceived, or I am, and as it is impossible it can be the Minister of Police, as he has the guardianship of the safety and honor of your Majesty, it is probable that I am in error. However, sire, if I might advise, your Majesty will interrogate the person of whom I spoke to you, and I will urge your Majesty to do him this honor." "Most willingly, Duke. Under your auspices I will receive any person you please, but you must not expect me to be too confiding. Baron, have you any report more recent than this dated the 20th of February? This is the 4th of March." "No, sire, but I am hourly expecting one. It may have arrived since I left my office." "Go thither, and if there be none, well, well," continued Louis XVIII, "make one. That is the usual way, is it not?" And the king laughed facetiously. "Oh, sire," replied the minister,
We have no occasion to invent any. Every day our desks are loaded with most circumstantial denunciations, coming from hosts of people who hope for some return for services which they seek to render, but cannot. They trust to fortune and rely upon some unexpected event in some way to justify their predictions. "Well, sir, go," said Louis XVIII, "and remember that I am waiting for you." "I will but go and return, sire. I shall be back in 10 minutes. "And I, sire," said Monsieur de Blacas, "will go and find my messenger." "Wait, sir, wait," said Louis XVIII. "Really, Monsieur de Blacas, I must change your armorial bearings. I will give you an eagle with outstretched wings, holding in its claws a prey which tries in vain to escape, and bearing this device, Tenax." "Sire, I listen," said de Blacas, biting his nails with impatience. "I wish to consult you on this passage, Molli fugiens angelitu. You know it refers to a stag flying from a wolf. Are you not a sportsman and a great wolf hunter? Well then, what do you think of the Molli angelitu?" "Admirable, sire. But my messenger is like the stag you refer to, for he has posted 220 leagues in scarcely 3 days." "Which is undergoing a great fatigue and anxiety, my dear Duke. When we have a telegraph which transmits messages in 3 or 4 hours, and that without getting in the least out of breath." "Oh, sire, you recompense but badly this poor young man, who has come so far, and with so much ardour, to give your Majesty useful information, if only for the sake of Monsieur de Salvieux, who recommends him to me. I entreat your Majesty to receive him graciously." "Monsieur de Salvieux, my brother's chamberlain?" "Yes, sire." "He is at Marseille?" "And writes me thence." "Does he speak to you of this conspiracy?" "No, but strongly recommends Monsieur de Villefort, and begs me to present him to your Majesty." "Monsieur de Villefort!" cried the king. "Is the messenger's name Monsieur de Villefort?" "Yes, sire." "And he comes from Marseille?" "In person." "Why did you not mention his name at once?" replied the king, betraying some uneasiness. "Sire, I thought his name was unknown to your Majesty." "No, no, Blacas. He is a man of strong and elevated understanding, ambitious too, and pardieu, you know his father's name?" "His father?" "Yes, Noirtier." "Noirtier the Girondin? Noirtier the senator?" "He himself." "And your Majesty has employed the son of such a man?" "Blacas, my friend, you have but limited comprehension. I told you Villefort was ambitious, and to attain his ambition Villefort would sacrifice everything, even his father." "Then, sire, may I present him?" "This instant, Duke. Where is he?" "Waiting below, in my carriage." "Seek him at once." "I hasten to do so." The Duke left the royal presence with the speed of a young man. His really sincere royalism made him youthful again. Louis XVIII remained alone, and turning his eyes on his half-opened Horace, muttered, "Justum et tanacem propositi virum." Monsieur de Blacas returned as speedily as he had departed, but in the antechamber he was forced to appeal to the king's authority. Villefort's dusty garb, his costume, which was not of courtly cut, excited the susceptibility of Monsieur de Breze, who was all astonishment at finding that this young man had the audacity to enter before the king in such attire. The Duke, however, overcame all difficulties with a word, His Majesty's order, and in spite of the protestations which the master of ceremonies made, for the honour of his office and principles, Villefort was introduced. The king was seated in the same place where the Duke had left him.
On opening the door, Villefort found himself facing him, and the young magistrate's first impulse was to pause. "Come in, Monsieur de Villefort," said the king. "Come in." Villefort bowed, and advancing a few steps, waited until the king should interrogate him. "Monsieur de Villefort," said Louis XVIII, "the Duke de Blacas assures me you have some interesting information to communicate." "Sire, the Duke is right, and I believe your Majesty will think it equally important." "In the first place, and before everything else, sir, is the news as bad, in your opinion, as I am asked to believe?" "Sire, I believe it to be most urgent, but I hope, for the speed I have used, that it is not irreparable." "Speak as fully as you please, sir," said the king, who began to give way to the emotion which had showed itself in Blacas's face and affected Villefort's voice. "Speak, sir, and pray begin at the beginning. I like order in everything." "Sire," said Villefort, "I will render a faithful report to your Majesty, but I must entreat your forgiveness if my anxiety leads to some obscurity in my language." A glance at the king after this discreet and subtle exordium assured Villefort of the benignity of his august auditor, and he went on. "Sire, I have come as rapidly to Paris as possible to inform your Majesty that I have discovered, in the exercise of my duties, not a commonplace and insignificant plot, such as is every day got up in the lower ranks of the people and in the army, but an actual conspiracy, a storm which menaces no less than your Majesty's throne. Sire, the usurper is arming 3 ships. He meditates some project, which, however mad, is yet perhaps terrible. At this moment he will have left Elba to go whither I know not, but assuredly to attempt a landing either at Naples or on the coast of Tuscany, or perhaps on the shores of France. Your Majesty is well aware that the sovereign of the island of Elba has maintained his relations with Italy and France." "I am, sir," said the king, much agitated. "And recently we have had information that the Bonapartist clubs have had meetings in the Rue Saint-Jacques. But proceed, I beg of you. How did you obtain these details?" "Sire, they are the results of an examination which I have made of a man of Marseille, whom I have watched for some time, and arrested on the day of my departure. This person, a sailor of turbulent character, and whom I suspected of Bonapartism, has been secretly to the island of Elba. There he saw the Grand Marshal, who charged him with an oral message to a Bonapartist in Paris, whose name I could not extract from him, but this mission was to prepare men's minds for a return. It is the man who says this, sire. A return which will soon occur." "And where is this man?" "In prison, sire." "And the matter seems serious to you?" "So serious, sire, that when the circumstance surprised me in the midst of a family festival, on the very day of my betrothal, I left my bride and friends, postponing everything, that I might hasten to lay at your Majesty's feet the fears which impressed me, and the assurance of my devotion." "True," said Louis XVIII. "Was there not a marriage engagement between you and Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran?" "Daughter of one of your Majesty's most faithful servants." Yes, but let us talk of this plot, Monsieur de Villefort." "Sire, I fear it is more than a plot. I fear it is a conspiracy." "A conspiracy in these times," said Louis XVIII, smiling, "is a thing very easy to meditate, but more difficult to conduct to an end, inasmuch as, re-established so recently on the throne of our ancestors, we have our eyes open at once upon the past, the present, and the future. For the last 10 months my ministers have redoubled their vigilance in order to watch the shore of the Mediterranean. If Bonaparte landed at Naples, the whole coalition would be on foot
before he could even reach Piemono. If he landed in Tuscany, he would be in an unfriendly territory. If he landed in France, it must be with a handful of men, and the result of that would be easily foretold, execrated as he is by the population. Take courage, sir, but at the same time rely on our royal gratitude." "Ah, here is Monsieur d'Andre," cried de Blacas. At this instant, the Minister of Police appeared at the door, pale, trembling, and as if ready to faint. Villefort was about to retire, but Monsieur de Blacas, taking his hand, restrained him. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11. The Corsican Ogre. At the sight of this agitation, Louis XVIII pushed from him violently the table at which he was sitting. "What ails you, Baron?" he exclaimed. "You appear quite aghast. Has your uneasiness anything to do with what Monsieur de Blacas has told me, and Monsieur de Villefort has just confirmed?" Monsieur de Blacas moved suddenly towards the Baron, but the fright of the courtier pleaded for the forbearance of the statesman, and besides, as matters were, it was much more to his advantage that the prefect of police should triumph over him than that he should humiliate the prefect. "Sire," stammered the Baron. "Well, what is it?" asked Louis XVIII. The Minister of Police, giving way to an impulse of despair, was about to throw himself at the feet of Louis XVIII, who retreated a step and frowned. "Will you speak?" he said. "Oh, sire, what a dreadful misfortune! I am indeed to be pitied. I can never forgive myself." "Monsieur," said Louis XVIII, "I command you to speak." "Well, sire, the usurper left Elba on the 26th of February, and landed on the 1st of March." "And where? In Italy?" asked the king eagerly. "In France, sir, at a small port near Antibes, in the Gulf of Juan." "The usurper landed in France, near Antibes, in the Gulf of Juan, 250 leagues from Paris, on the 1st of March, and you only acquired this information today, the 4th of March? Well, sir, what you tell me is impossible. You must have received a false report, or you have gone mad." "Alas, sire, it is but too true." Louis made a gesture of indescribable anger and alarm, and then drew himself up as if this sudden blow had struck him at the same moment in heart and countenance. "In France!" he cried. "The usurper in France? Then they did not watch over this man. Who knows, they were perhaps in league with him." "Oh, sire!" exclaimed the Duc de Blacas, "Monsieur d'Andre is not a man to be accused of treason. Sire, we have all been blind, and the Minister of Police has shared the general blindness, that is all." "But," said Villefort, and then suddenly checking himself, he was silent. Then he continued, "Your pardon, sire," he said, bowing. "My zeal carried me away. Will your majesty deign to excuse me?" "Speak, sir, speak boldly," replied Louis. "You alone forewarned us of the evil. Now try and aid us with the remedy." "Sire," said Villefort, "the usurper is detested in the south, and it seems to me that if he ventured into the south, it would be easy to raise a Languedoc and Provence against him." "Yes, assuredly," replied the minister, "but he is advancing by Gap and Sisteron." "Advancing? He is advancing?" said Louis XVIII. "Is he then advancing on Paris?" The Minister of Police maintained a silence which was equivalent to a complete avowal. "And Dauphine, sir?" inquired the king of Villefort. "Do you think it possible to rouse that as well as Provence?" "Sire, I am sorry to tell your Majesty a cruel fact, but the feeling in Dauphine is quite the reverse of that in Provence or Languedoc. The mountaineers are Bonapartists, sire. Then, murmured Louis, he was well informed. And how many men had he with him? I do not know, sire, answered the Minister of Police. What? You do not know? Have you neglected to obtain information on that point? Of course it is of no consequence, he added with a withering smile. Sire, it was impossible to learn. The dispatch simply stated the fact of the landing and the route taken by the usurper. And how did this dispatch reach you? Inquired the king. The minister bowed his head, and while a deep colour overspread his cheeks, he stammered out, By the telegraph, sire. Louis XVIII advanced a step and folded his arms over his chest, as Napoleon would have done. So then, he exclaimed, turning pale with anger, 7 conjoined and allied armies overthrow that man. A miracle of heaven replaced me on the throne of my fathers after 25 years of exile. I have, during those 25 years, spared no pains to understand the people of France and the interests which were confided to me. And now, when I see the fruition of my wishes almost within reach, the power I hold in my hands bursts and shatters me to atoms. Sire, it is a fatality, murmured the minister, feeling that the pressure of circumstances, however light a thing to destiny, was too much for any human strength to endure. What our enemies say of us is then true. We have learnt nothing, forgotten nothing. If I were betrayed as he was, I would console myself, but to be in the midst of persons elevated by myself to places of honour, who ought to watch over me more carefully than over themselves, for my fortune is theirs. Before me they were nothing. After me they will be nothing, and perish miserably from incapacity, ineptitude. Oh yes, sir, you are right. It is fatality. The minister quailed before this outburst of sarcasm. Monsieur de Blacas wiped the moisture from his brow. Villefort smiled within himself, for he felt his increased importance. To fall, continued King Louis, who at the first glance had sounded the abyss on which the monarchy hung suspended. To fall, and learn of that fall by my telegraph? Oh, I would rather mount the scaffold of my brother, Louis XVI, than thus descend the staircase at the Tuileries, driven away by ridicule. Ridicule, sir! Why, you know not its power in France, and yet you ought to know it. Sire, murmured the minister, for pity's— Approach, Monsieur de Villefort, resumed the king, addressing the young man, who, motionless and breathless, was listening to a conversation on which depended the destiny of a kingdom. Approach, and tell monsieur that it is possible to know beforehand all that he has not known. Sire, it was really impossible to learn secrets which that man concealed from all the world. Really impossible? Yes, that is a great word, sir. Unfortunately, there are great words as there are great men. I have measured them. Really impossible for a minister who has an office, agents, spies, and 1,500,000 francs for secret service money to know what is going on at 60 leagues from the coast of France? Well then, see, here is a gentleman who had none of these resources at his disposal. A gentleman, only a simple magistrate, who learned more than you with all your police, and who would have saved my crown if, like you, he had the power of directing a telegraph. The look of the Minister of Police was turned with concentrated spite on Villefort, who bent his head in modest triumph. I do not mean that for you, Blacas, continued Louis XVIII, for if you have discovered nothing, at least you have had the good sense to persevere in your suspicions. Any other than yourself would have considered the disclosure of Monsieur de Villefort insignificant, or else dictated by venal ambition." These words were an allusion to the sentiments which the Minister of Police had uttered with so much confidence an hour before. Villefort understood the king's intent. Any other person would perhaps have been overcome by such an intoxicating draught of praise, but he feared to make for himself a mortal enemy of the police minister, although he saw that d'Andre was irrevocably lost. In fact, the minister, who in the plenitude of his power had been unable to unearth Napoleon's secret, might in despair at his own downfall interrogate Dantès, and so lay bare the motives of Villefort's plot. Realizing this, Villefort came to the rescue of the crestfallen minister, instead of aiding to crush him. "Sire," said Villefort, "the suddenness of this event must prove to your Majesty that the issue is in the hands of Providence. What your Majesty is pleased to attribute to me as profound perspicacity is simply owing to chance, and I have profited by that chance like a good and devoted servant. That's all. Do not attribute to me more than I deserve, sire, that your Majesty may never have occasion to recall the first opinion you have pleased to form of me." The Minister of Police thanked the young man by an eloquent look, and Villefort understood that he had succeeded in his design. That is to say, that without forfeiting the gratitude of the king, he had made a friend of one on whom, in case of necessity, he might rely. "It is well," resumed the king. "And now, gentlemen," he continued, turning towards Monsieur de Blacas and the Minister of Police, "I have no further occasion for you, and you may retire. What now remains to do is in the department of the Minister of War." "Fortunately, sire," said Monsieur de Blacas, "we can rely on the army. Your Majesty knows how every report confirms their loyalty and attachment." "Do not mention reports, Duke, to me, for I know now what confidence to place in them. Yet, speaking of reports, Baron, what have you learned with regard to the affair in the Rue Saint-Jacques?" "The affair in the Rue Saint-Jacques!" exclaimed Villefort, unable to repress an exclamation. Then suddenly pausing, he added, "Your pardon, sire, but my devotion to your Majesty has made me forget, not the respect I have, for that is too deeply engraved in my heart, but the rules of etiquette." Go on, sir," replied the king. "You have today earned the right to make inquiries here." "Sire," interposed the Minister of Police, "I came a moment ago to give your Majesty fresh information which I had obtained on his head, when your Majesty's attention was attracted by the terrible event that has occurred in the Gulf, and now these facts will cease to interest your Majesty." "On the contrary, sir, on the contrary," said Louis XVIII. "This affair seems to me to have a decided connection with that which occupies our attention, and the death of General Quesnel will perhaps put us on the direct track of a great internal conspiracy." At the name of General Quesnel, Villefort trembled. "Everything points to the conclusion, sire," said the Minister of Police, "that death was not the result of suicide, as we first believed, but of assassination. General Quesnel, it appears, had just left a Bonapartist club when he disappeared. An unknown person had been with him that morning, and made an appointment with him in the Rue Saint-Jacques. Unfortunately, the general's valet, who was dressing his hair at the moment when the stranger entered, heard the street mentioned, but did not catch the number." As the police minister related this to the king, Villefort, who looked as if his very life hung on the speaker's lips, turned alternately red and pale. The king looked towards him. "Do you not think with me, Monsieur de Villefort, that General Quesnel, whom they believe attached to the usurper, but who was really entirely devoted to me, has perished the victim of a Bonapartist ambush?" "It is probable, sire," replied Villefort. "But is this all that is known?" "They are on the track of the man who appointed the meeting with him." "On his track?" said Villefort. "Yes, the servant has given his description. He is a man of from 50 to 52 years of age, dark, with black eyes covered with shaggy eyebrows, and a thick moustache. He was dressed in a blue frock coat, buttoned up to the chin, and wore at his buttonhole the rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor. Yesterday, a person exactly corresponding with this description was followed, but he was lost sight of at the corner of the Rue de la Jussienne and the Rue Coq-Héron." Villefort leaned on the back of an armchair, for as the Minister of Police went on speaking, he felt his legs bend under him. But when he learned that the unknown had escaped the vigilance of the agent who followed him, he breathed again. "Continue to seek for this man, sir," said the king to the Minister of Police. "For if, as I am all but convinced, General Quesnel, who would have been so useful to us at this moment, has been murdered, his assassins, Bonapartists or not, shall be cruelly punished." It required all Villefort's coolness not to betray the terror with which this declaration of the king inspired him. "How strange," continued the king with some asperity. "The police think that they have disposed of the whole matter when they say, 'A murder has been committed,' and especially so when they can add, 'and we are on the track of the guilty persons.' Sire, your Majesty will, I trust, be amply satisfied on this point at least." "We shall see. I will no longer detain you, Monsieur de Villefort, for you must be fatigued after so long a journey. Go and rest. Of course, you can stop at your father's." A feeling of faintness came over Villefort. "No, sire," he replied. "I alighted at the Hôtel de Madrid, in the Rue de Tournon." "But you have seen him?" "Sire, I went straight to the Duc de Blacas." "But you will see him, then?" "I think not, sire." "Ah, I forgot," said Louis, smiling in a manner which proved that all these questions were not made without a motive. "I forgot you and Monsieur Noirtier are not on the best terms possible, and that is another sacrifice made to the royal cause, and for which you should be recompensed." "Sire, the kindness of your Majesty deigns to evince towards me is a recompense which so far surpasses my utmost ambition that I have nothing more to ask for." "Never mind, sir. We will not forget you. Make your mind easy. In the meanwhile," the king here detached the cross of the Legion of Honor, which he usually wore over his blue coat, near the cross of Saint Louis, above the order of Notre Dame du Mont Carmel and Saint Lazare, and gave it to Villefort. "In the meanwhile, take this cross." "Sire," said Villefort, "your Majesty mistakes. This is an officer's cross." "Ma foi," said Louis XVIII., "take it, such as it is, for I have not the time to procure you another. Blacas, let it be your care to see that the brevet is made out and sent to Monsieur de Villefort." Villefort's eyes were filled with tears of joy and pride. He took the cross and kissed it. "And now," he said, "may I inquire what are your orders with which your Majesty deigns to honor me?" "Take what rest you require, and remember that if you are not able to serve me here in Paris, you may be of the greatest service to me at Marseille." "Sire," replied Villefort, bowing, "in an hour I shall have quitted Paris." "Go, sir," said the king, "and should I forget you, kings' memories are short, do not be afraid to bring yourself to my recollection. Baron, send for the Minister of War. Blacas, remain." "Ah, sir," said the Minister of Police to Villefort, as they left the Tuileries, "you entered by luck's door. Your fortune is made." "Will it be long first?" muttered Villefort.
saluting the minister, whose career was ended, and looking about him for a hackney coach. One passed at the moment, which he hailed. He gave his address to the driver, and springing in, threw himself on the seat, and gave loose to dreams of ambition. 10 minutes afterwards, Villefort reached his hotel, ordered horses to be ready in 2 hours, and asked to have his breakfast brought to him. He was about to begin his repast when the sound of the bell rang sharp and loud. The valet opened the door, and Villefort heard someone speak his name. "Who could know that I was here already?" said the young man. The valet entered. "Well," said Villefort, "what is it? Who rang? Who asked for me?" "A stranger. You will not send his name." "A stranger who will not send in his name? What can he want with me?" "He wishes to speak to you." "To me?" "Yes." "Did he mention my name?" "Yes." "What sort of person is he?" "Why, sir, a man of about 50. "Short or tall?"
"About your own height, sir."
"Dark or fair?"
"Dark, very dark, with black eyes, black hair, black eyebrows."
"And how dressed?" asked Villefort quickly.
"In a blue frock-coat, buttoned up close, decorated with the Legion of Honor."
"It is he!" said Villefort, turning pale. "Et pardieu!" said the individual whose description we have twice given, entering the door. "What a great deal of ceremony! Is it the custom in Marseille for sons to keep their fathers waiting in their anterooms?"
"Father," cried Villefort, "then I was not deceived. I felt sure it must be you."
"Well then, if you felt so sure," replied the newcomer, putting his cane in a corner and his hat on a chair, "allow me to say, my dear Gérard, that it was not very filial of you to keep me waiting at the door."
"Leave us, Germain," said Villefort.
The servant quitted the apartment with evident signs of astonishment. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12. Father and Son. Monsieur Noirtier, for it was indeed he who entered, looked after the servant until the door was closed, and then, fearing, no doubt, that he might be overheard in the antechamber, he opened the door again, nor was the precaution useless, as appeared from the rapid retreat of Germain, who proved that he was not exempt from the sin which ruined our first parents. Monsieur Noirtier then took the trouble to close and bolt the antechamber door, then that of the bedchamber, and then extended his hand to Villefort, who had followed all his motions with surprise which he could not conceal. "Well, now, my dear Gérard," said he to the young man with a very significant look, "do you know, you seem as if you were not very glad to see me." "My dear father," said Villefort, "I am on the contrary delighted, but I so little expected your visit that it has somewhat overcome me." "But, my dear fellow," replied Monsieur Noirtier, seating himself, "I might say the same thing to you. When you announced to me your wedding for the 28th of February, and on the 3rd of March you turn up here in Paris." "And if I have come, my dear father," said Gérard, drawing closer to Monsieur Noirtier, "do not complain, for it is for you that I came, and my journey will be your salvation." "Ah, indeed," said Monsieur Noirtier, stretching himself out at his ease in the chair. "Really, pray tell me all about it, for it must be interesting." "Father, you have heard speak of a certain Bonapartist club in the Rue Saint-Jacques?" "Number 53. Yes, I am vice-president."
Father, your coolness makes me shudder.
Why, my dear boy? When a man has been proscribed by the mountaineers, has escaped from Paris in a hécat, been hunted over the plains of Bordeaux by Robespierre's bloodhounds, he becomes accustomed to most things. But go on. What about the club in Rue Saint-Jacques?
Why, they induced General Quesnel to go there, and General Quesnel, who quitted his own house at 9 o'clock in the evening, was found the next day in the Seine.
And who told you this fine story?
The king himself.
Well then, in return for your story, continued Noirtier, I will tell you another.
My dear father, I think I already know what you are about to tell me.
Ah, you have heard of the landing of the emperor.
Not so loud, father, I entreat you, for your own sake as well as mine. Yes, I heard this news, and knew it even before you could. For 3 days ago I posted from Marseille to Paris with all possible speed, half desperate at the enforced delay.
3 days ago? You are crazy. Why, 3 days ago the emperor had not landed.
No matter, I was aware of his intention.
How did you know about it?
By a letter addressed to you from the island of Elba.
To me?
To you, and which I discovered in the pocketbook of the messenger. Had that letter fallen into the hands of another, you, my dear father, would probably ere this have been shot.
Villefort's father laughed. "Ha, ha, come, come," said he. "Will the Restoration adopt imperial methods so promptly? Shot, my dear boy? What an idea! Where is the letter you speak of? I know you too well to suppose you would allow such a thing to pass you."
I burnt it, for fear that even a fragment should remain, for that letter must have led to your condemnation.
"And the destruction of your future prospects," replied Noirtier. "Yes, I can easily comprehend that. But I have nothing to fear while I have you to protect me."
I do better than that, sir. I save you.
You do? Why, really, the thing becomes more and more dramatic. Explain yourself.
I must refer again to the club in the Rue Saint-Jacques.
It appears that this club is rather a bore to the police. Why didn't they search more vigilantly? They would have found.
They have not found, but they are on the track.
Yes, that's the usual phrase. I am quite familiar with it. When the police is at fault, it declares that it is on the track, and the government who patiently awaits the day when it comes to say, with a sneaking air, that the track is lost.
Yes, but they have found a corpse. The general has been killed, and in all countries they call that a murder.
A murder, do you call it? Why, there is nothing to prove that the general was murdered. People are found every day in the Seine, having thrown themselves in or having been drowned from not knowing how to swim.
Father, you knew very well that the general was not a man to drown himself in despair, and people do not bathe in the Seine in the month of January. No, no, do not be deceived. This was murder in every sense of the word.
And who thus designated it?
The king himself.
The king! I thought he was philosopher enough to allow that there was no murder in politics. In politics, my dear fellow, you know as well as I do, there are no men, but ideas, no feelings, but interests. In politics we do not kill a man, we only remove an obstacle, that is all. Would you like to know how matters have progressed? Well, I will tell you. It was thought reliance might be placed in General Quesnel.
He was recommended to us from the island of Elba. One of us went to him and invited him to the Rue Saint-Jacques, where he would find some friends. He came there, and the plan was unfolded to him for leaving Elba, the projected landing, etc. When he had heard and comprehended all to the fullest extent, he replied that he was a royalist. Then all looked at each other. He was made to take an oath, and did so, but with such an ill grace that it was really tempting Providence to swear him, and yet, in spite of that, the general was allowed to depart free, perfectly free. Yet he did not return home. What could that mean? Why, my dear fellow, that on leaving us he lost his way, that's all. A murder. Really, Villefort, you surprise me. You, a deputy procureur, to found an accusation on such bad premises. Did I ever say to you, when you were fulfilling your character as a royalist, and cut off the head of one of my party, "My son, you have committed a murder"? No, I said. Very well, sir, you have gained the victory. Tomorrow, perchance, it will be our turn. But, father, take care. When our turn comes, our revenge will be sweeping. I do not understand you. You rely on the usurper's return. We do. You are mistaken. He will not advance 2 leagues into the interior of France without being followed, tracked, and caught like a wild beast. My dear fellow, the Emperor is at this moment on the way to Grenoble. On the 10th or 12th, he will be at Lyons, and on the 20th or 25th at Paris. The people will rise. Yes, to go and meet him. He has but a handful of men with him, and armies will be dispatched against him. Yes, to escort him into the capital. Really, my dear Gérard, you are but a child. You think yourself well informed because the telegraph has told you. 3 days after the landing, the usurper has landed at Cannes with several men. He is pursued. But where is he? What is he doing? You do not know at all. And in this way they will chase him to Paris without drawing a trigger. Grenoble and Lyons are faithful cities, and will oppose him to an impassable barrier. Grenoble will open her gates to him with enthusiasm. All Lyons will hasten to welcome him. Believe me, we are as well informed as you, and our police are as good as your own. Would you like a proof of it? Well, you wish to conceal your journey from me, and yet I knew of your arrival half an hour after you had passed the barrier. You gave your direction to no one but your postilion. Yet I have your address, and in proof I am here, the very instant you are going to sit at table. Ring, then, if you please, for a second knife, fork, and plate, and we will dine together. Indeed, replied Villefort, looking at his father with astonishment. You really do seem very well informed. Eh? The thing is simple enough. You are in power of only the means that money produces. We who are in expectation have those with devotion prompts. Devotion? Said Villefort with a sneer. Yes, devotion, for that is, I believe, the phrase for hopeful ambition. And Villefort's father extended his hand to the bell-rope to summon the servant whom his son had not called. Villefort caught his arm. "Wait, my dear father," said the young man. "One word more." "Say on." "However stupid the royalist police may be, They do know one terrible thing.
And what is that?
The description of the man who, on the morning of the day when General Quesnel disappeared, presented himself at his house.
Oh, the admirable police have found that out, have they? And what may be that description?
Dark complexion, hair, eyebrows and whiskers, black, blue frock coat, buttoned up to the chin, rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor in his buttonhole, a hat with wide brim, and a cane.
Aha, that is it, said Noirtier. And why then have they not laid hands on him?
Because yesterday or the day before, they lost sight of him at the corner of the Rue Coqueron.
Didn't I say that your police were good for nothing?
Yes, but they may catch him yet.
True, said Noirtier, looking carelessly around him. True, if this person were not on his guard as he is, and he added with a smile, he will consequently make a few changes in his personal appearance.
At these words he rose and put off his frock coat and cravat, went towards a table on which he lay his son's toilet articles, lathered his face, took a razor and, with a firm hand, cut off the compromising whiskers. Villefort watched him with alarm, not devoid of admiration. His whiskers cut off, Noirtier gave another turn to his hair, took instead of his black cravat a coloured neckerchief which lay at the top of an open portmanteau, put on in lieu of his blue and high-buttoned frock-coat, a coat of Villefort's of dark brown and cut away in front, tried on before the glass a narrow-brimmed hat of his son's, which appeared to fit him perfectly, and leaving his cane in the corner where he had deposited it, he took up a small bamboo switch, cut the air with it once or twice, and walked about with that easy swagger which has one of his principal characteristics.
"Well," he said, turning towards his wondering son, when his disguise was completed, "well, do you think your police will recognize me now?"
"No, father," stammered Villefort. At least, I hope not."
"And now, my dear boy," continued Noirtier, "I rely on your prudence to remove all the things which I leave in your care."
"Oh, rely on me," said Villefort.
"Yes, yes, and now I believe you are right, and that you have really saved my life. Be assured I will return the favor hereafter."
Villefort shook his head.
"You are not convinced yet."
"I hope at least that you may be mistaken."
"Shall you see the king again?"
"Perhaps."
"Would you pass in his eyes for a prophet?"
"Prophets of evil are not in favor at the court, father."
"True, but some day they do them justice. And supposing a second restoration, you would then pass for a great man."
"Well, what should I say to the king?"
"Say to him, 'Sire, you are deceived as to the feeling in France, as to the opinions of the towns, and the prejudices of the army. He whom in Paris you call the Corsican Ogre, who at Nevers is styled the usurper, is already saluted as Bonaparte at Lyons and Emperor at Grenoble. You think he is tracked, pursued, captured. He is advancing as rapidly as his own eagles. The soldiers you believe to be dying with hunger, worn out with fatigue, ready to desert, gather like atoms of snow about the rolling ball as it hastens onward. Sire, go. Leave France to its real master, to him who acquired it, not by purchase, but by right of conquest. Go, sire. Not that you incur any risk, for your adversary is powerful enough to show you mercy, but because it would be humiliating for a grandson of Saint Louis to owe his life to the man of Arcola, Marengo,
Austerlitz. Tell him this, Gérard, or rather tell him nothing. Keep your journey a secret. Do not boast of what you have come to Paris to do, or have done. Return with all speed, enter Marseille at night and your house by the back door, and there remain, quiet, submissive, secret, and above all inoffensive, for this time I swear to you, we shall act like powerful men who know their enemies. Go, my son, go, my dear Gérard, and by your obedience to my paternal orders, or if you prefer it, friendly counsels, we will keep you in your place. This will be, added Noirtier with a smile, one means by which you may a second time save me. If the political balance should some day take another turn, and cast you aloft while hurling me down, adieu, my dear Gérard, and at your next journey, alight at my door. Noirtier left the room when he had finished, with the same calmness that had characterized him during the whole of this remarkable and trying conversation. Villefort, pale and agitated, ran to the window, put aside the curtain, and saw him pass, cool and collected, by 2 or 3 ill-looking men at the corner of the street, who were there, perhaps, to arrest a man with black whiskers and a blue frock-coat and hat with broad brim. Villefort stood watching, breathless, until his father had disappeared at the Rue Bussy. Then he turned to the various articles he had left behind him, put the black cravat and blue frock-coat at the bottom of the portmanteau, threw the hat into a dark closet, broke the cane into small bits and flung it in the fire, put on his travelling cap, and calling his valet, checked with a look the 1,000 questions he was ready to ask, paid his bill, sprang into his carriage, which was ready, learned at Lyons that Bonaparte had entered Grenoble, and in the midst of the tumult which prevailed along the road, at length reached Marseille, a prey to all the hopes and fears which enter into the heart of man with ambition and its first successes. End of chapter 12.